Hello, everyone. My name is Ole Kagan, and I'm the Community Engagement Coordinator with LA County Library, and I welcome you to Work Ready Careers in Freelance Grant Writing. Before we get going with today's event, I'll take care of some housekeeping, do the land acknowledgement, and tell you a little bit about the Work Ready program. So if you can hear me and see the slide on the screen, then you're good to go. However, if you're having trouble hearing me or seeing the slide on the screen, do let me know in the chat and I will do my best to assist. If you'd like to listen to this presentation on the phone, you can do that by calling 1-669-900-6833 and using the access code 830-8298-1078 and the passcode 123123. Additionally, automated closed captioning is available on Zoom in case you'd like to read along with the presentations. To enable that, you would press the CC button in your Zoom window. Now, you may have noticed that the mics and video for attendees of the program have been disabled. That's so that everyone can focus on our panelists today. We do, however, welcome your questions and comments. Questions can go into the Q&A box. That's the one with the single speech bubble, and comments can go in the chat. All right. Now it's time for our land acknowledgement. The County of Los Angeles recognizes that we occupy land originally and still inhabited and cared for by the Tongva, Tataviam, Serrano, Kizh, and Chumash peoples. We honor and pay respect to their elders and descendants, past, present, and emerging, as they continue their stewardship of these lands and waters. We acknowledge that settler colonization resulted in land seizure, disease, subjugation, slavery, relocation, broken promises, genocide, and multi-generational trauma. This acknowledgement demonstrates our responsibility and commitment to truth, healing, and reconciliation, and to elevating the stories, culture, and community of the original inhabitants of Los Angeles County. We are grateful to have the opportunity to live and work on these ancestral lands. We are dedicated to growing and sustaining relationships with Native peoples and local tribal governments, including, in no particular order, the Fernandino Tataviam Band of Mission Indians, the Gabrielino Tongva Indians of California Tribal Council, the Gabrielino Tongva San Gabriel Band of Mission Indians, the Gabrielino Band of Mission Indians Kizh Nation, San Manuel Band of Mission Indians, San Fernando Band of Mission Indians. To learn more about the First Peoples of Los Angeles County, please visit the Los Angeles City County Native American Indian Commission website at lanic.lacounty.gov. All right, and now I'd like to quickly tell you about the Work Ready program before we get on to the introductions of our panelists. Work Ready started in December of 2020 with the library lending laptops and hotspots out of 20 and now 27 library locations and presenting virtual events on a range of work-related topics in order to help people get a job, improve their work situation, and plan a more sustainable career path. To see over 50 of our past events, head over to the Work and Career playlist on our YouTube channel. The Work Ready program is made possible due to funds provided by the American Rescue Plan. And we have a great event coming up for you next week, and that is Work Ready, Creating a Purposeful Retirement. That's on Tuesday, February 18th at 11 a.m. Maybe that purposeful retirement will include freelance grant writing. So there's always connections between our variety of Work Ready programs. I recommend going to the playlist and scrolling down to see what we've done. Maybe there will be topics of interest for you and people you know. But next week, Karen Klein, who is an award-winning LA Times journalist and author of Rethinking College, will tell you about how to create a meaningful third act. and that program is absolutely free. I'm going to post a link to register for that in the chat. And if you'd like to learn more about our virtual or in-person events, you can go to lacountylibrary.org. On the top right-hand side, hit the events button. That'll open up our calendar with in-person and virtual events for all ages, kids, teens, adults, and older adults. And if you're only interested in our virtual programs, you can hover over that events button. There'll be a little drop down that says virtual programming. Click on that and you'll get all the Zoom events just like this one. Also, absolutely free. All right, and now it's time for me to introduce our panelists for the day. Grab that information. So our first panelist is Bryn Mancuso-Crane. She's a Chicago, Illinois transplant, originally from Boston, Massachusetts, with 15 years of nonprofit fundraising, external affairs and strategic communications, and project management experience. She spent her career in the education space, working with a variety of organizations that are all ensuring in their own ways that all students receive the resources, support, and championship they deserve to achieve their biggest dreams. Since 2022, she pivoted away from working as a full-time team member at just one organization to launch her own fundraising consultancy for nonprofits, Pen to Paper Consulting. Her passion is planning and writing for missions she cares about deeply, and she geeks out at the chance to take in huge amounts of information and synthesize it into stories, pitches, strategic plans, proposals, impact snapshots, etc., that inform, motivate, and inspire others to take action. From her years in various fundraising leadership roles, she knows how pivotal the planning and strategy behind the way we share stories and build relationships with stakeholders are. She's a graduate of Northwestern University and holds a BA in English Literature. Bryn, welcome. Our next panelist is Kim Zanti. Kim honed her writing skills, writing grants in the Los Angeles arts and culture arena for small and mid-sized organizations such as Get Lit, Words Ignite, Super Collider, Indian Film Festival of Los Angeles County Arts for All Initiative for the Los Angeles Arts Commission, and many others. After 2 decades in the nonprofit arena, Kim pivoted to research when she was hired on a grant from the Walt Disney Company to project manage the Next Generation Creativity Study, which developed and deployed a creative assessment for youth. The Next Generation Study took her around the country and into the UK, deploying the assessment and reporting the results from classrooms, maker clubs, and other youth learning environments. Working alongside principal investigator and founder Dr. James Catterall at the Centers for Research on Creativity, for which she became associate director. Kim managed multiple simultaneous studies in collaboration with client teams that included Alameda County Office of Education, Boys and Girls Clubs of America, California Arts Council, Inner City Arts, Royal Blind School of Scotland, the Grammy Foundation, the Walt Disney Company, and the Wooden Floor. Kim holds a master's degree in creativity studies from SUNY Buffalo State College. She collaborates with organizations, agencies, and individuals on storytelling projects that contribute to a more empathetic, creative society and sustainable environment. Welcome, Kim. And last but not least, Charles Flowers is approaching 25 years of experience in program delivery, communications and operations, and fundraising. Charles Flowers graduated Phi Beta Kappa from Vanderbilt University and received his MFA in poetry from the University of Oregon. With a proven ability to lead staff, board members, and volunteers, and a dedication to diversity, equity, and inclusion throughout his career, Charles has served in a leadership capacity at the Academy of American Poets, Lambda Literary Foundation, and Arts for LA, the regional arts advocacy organization. Welcome, Charles. So before we get going, we had a question in the chat about whether this is being recorded and whether this webinar will be available for later viewing, and the answer is yes. So if you're frantically taking notes and you're afraid you're going to miss something, don't worry because this is being recorded and I'll post it on our YouTube channel either later on today or tomorrow. Okay, welcome panelists, and thank you very much for being here. I'm very excited about asking you questions about freelance grant writing. But before I ask you questions, I want to put us all on the same page with our esteemed audience. And so I want to ask a question to our audience. And the question is, in a sentence or two, what is a grant to you? What does it mean, this term grant? So just quickly jot down your thoughts, folks out there, and let me know in the chat. That way we'll be able to gauge what our consensus general knowledge is about granting and what a grant is. So we're getting responses in, and just so all the folks out there are aware, especially the new folks to Work Ready, our chat is set to private, so we, the panelists, and I can see your responses, but folks can't see each other's responses. So I'll read some of them out loud here. So we got funding for a project, asking philanthropists for money for nonprofit organizations, okay? Funding to support a mission. A grant to me are resources that an organization can apply to its root mission or cause. Proposal to ask for funding for a worthy cause. Receiving money. Simple way of looking at it. Yeah, it's true. A formal request to receive free monies for a purposeful cause. The purpose is coming up a lot. Mission driven is coming up a lot. Money allocated to serve a human need. So we're getting a lot of money, and in fact, somebody put a bunch of dollar signs, but somebody else had put resources. So yes, not purely money, money for something. Monies that are put aside for certain people who meet criteria. Money funds to carry out a specific project. A proposal for money to a private or public fund. So we can think about who receives grants. We might talk about that later. Money from the government designated for a specific project. So government is one organization that provides grants. A grant is a gift. I like that definition. Free money given for specific uses. All right, thank you. Oh, I'm getting a lot of response. I love this. Uh, I think we've got a pretty good sense of what we mean. A grant is a free loan that does not have to be paid back. People that agree on a mission. Okay. I think our audience is pretty sophisticated here. We've got we've touched on a lot of points of what makes a grant. So I want to give our panelists also an opportunity to call out some of the items here. So, Charles, do you want to get started by maybe calling out some of the highlights of these responses?
Sure. I think I looked up Merriam-Webster while we were doing that as well to see what Merriam-Webster had to say, and it's kind of an old school like a gift, land or money, but resources. A grant is usually money. It is resources, but it can also be a loan for business, or it can be professional development. It can be all kinds of things. A grant to usually support a nonprofit's mission in achieving something. So a particular purpose. Rarely is there a grant just given. I think the exception would be during COVID or during natural disasters. There's a tendency to just give nonprofits money with not no strings attached, but they'll have to say how they've spent it, but it's not as specific because it's more of an emergency nature. So written proposal, absolutely. Specific requirements and reports. Yes, often you have to give a final report, a final accounting of how you spent the money. Um, and yeah, that they agree with your mission, that whatever mission you're writing for, they sort of um, most foundations have, we fund healthcare and
Mm,
education and arts, and or those
yeah,
three things. If you do animal rescue, you won't really apply to that foundation.
focused on that.
But it's very specific. Usually, foundations are very specific about what they'll support. This is great. Very.
Yeah.
intelligent.
Brain or Kim, do you have anything else to highlight that you've seen in the chat responses, or do you think we've covered the general gist of what a grant is?
Bryn?
I think you all did a
Yeah,
great
that's
job
good.
covering the general gist. I love that Oleg, you pulled out the word purposeful because I often think about, yes, the free money piece, but the money being tied to the expectation of a particular outcome or set of outcomes at the end of the grant. So there is, some of those strings attached. That we're all trying to pull and make happen. But there is sort of a dynamic setup and expectation set up in return for that free money. So,
Yeah.
but all tied to that broader, all important purpose or mission. So, wanted to just emphasize that.
And I'll add in that from the financial point of view, a loan you pay back, and that was brought up in the chat.
Mm,
A grant you don't, but a grant is, and I assume that's sort of where the thinking about free money comes from, is you don't have to pay it back, but that doesn't mean you're not, there aren't deliverables that you have to provide in order to show that you're using that money for the purpose intended. And there are different kinds of grants for organizational purposes and then project purposes. And then in all the different arenas of grant making, there's all kinds of variations on that as well.
thank you. So I think we've highlighted the essentials of what a grant is, which is, the kind of the result of what a freelance grant writer creates. So in order to get us kind of also grounded on this discussion of freelance grant writing, uh, can you give me some kind of idea of how to get started in grant writing and what was each of your progression to be a freelancer? Kim, do you want to, since you were just, do you want to get us started?
Sure. Um, so to get started, I think there's several things you want to ask yourself. And the first thing is, what do I love the most? What do I care about the most that I might want to write about and to delve into and get into a project with? So let's say it is early childhood education or scientific research or dancing or choreography. There's so many different ways you could go, but identifying what is an area you truly enjoy writing about because the work gets hard and you don't want to be doing something that you really don't care about. I think that's the biggest thing. And in starting, it depends on your work situation. What do you need in terms of paid work?
Hmm.
And I would start having a anchor job that pays your expenses, your living expenses, your rent, your food, your utilities, and then maybe take on a volunteer project or pick, respond to look for postings, people seeking grant writers in organizations where you might get paid, you might not, but the most important thing is you get the experience. And so I think the most important thing is identifying what you care about, taking care of getting stable financially, and then taking on one project at a time.
And Kim, I wanted to sort of follow up about your personal journey. Um, at what point did you feel like you could safely move to a kind of a freelance, um, a freelance stance in terms of your work life? Because you've worked for organizations, you've done freelance. So,
Mhm.
where was the kind of the cutoff for you where you could say, I can do this as a freelancer?
It's always been an ebb and flow. I have a good job and I'm writing, I'm good, meaning stable, and it pays
Mm,
everything, and I'm loving it, and it's all coming together and writing grants within that environment.
mm,
And then I've never just been a freelance grant writer.
mm,
Bryn has a business now where She provides services to clients. I've always had this was my path, stable job, freelance clients. The most I ever had at a time in that scenario was four freelance clients. Not, and that was not ideal. Uh,
That's a lot. That's a lot of
it's
work.
a lot. It was nuts. And that, but that lasted 1 year, and I had to say no more. I can't do that. So, it really is depending on your circumstances. For me, that made the most sense. And I always wrote, not always, primarily about arts, culture, arts education, and some community engagement type work, and my own film. I had to write a grant for that film. I made a short documentary, and I was able to write the grant.
Mhm,
That was the seed funding for it, and then it anchored my individual donor campaign.
mhm.
So that's where I'm heading with grant writing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Charles, how about for you? Kind of what was your progression from grant writing for an organization to doing it as a freelancer?
Sure. My first experience with the grant was as a program person. I was at the Academy of American Poets, and I was coordinating National Poetry Month, which is April, and I was asked to help or to assist the development person who was writing the National Endowment for the Arts grant. So a government grant has many, many steps, often complex. National Endowment for the Arts is fairly simple for most government grants. Government grants could be 100-page long requests. Um, so I was the program person putting in, like, so what did we do for National Poetry Month? And how many events did we have? And how many people came? And what were those social media? And all, so it was providing the information to the grant writer who could do the application and then later do the final report. And that was my first kind of entree. And I was that for a while. And then I've been moved fully into development fundraising, and at different jobs I had different um, picked up different skills in fundraising, but in 2012, I started working for Arts for LA, the regional arts advocacy group here, and they were about two-thirds funded by grants. So it went from
Mhm,
being like a very small uh, portion of my skill set to being all about my skill set. So that began and since then, I've done other kinds of fundraising, individual giving, things like that, end of year campaigns. But it's the grant writing that's sort of been solid, and sort of people. I think there's always a need because grants take time, and the current staff may not have the time to do it, so they're looking for someone to help and to assist as a freelancer. And then some people, they love the work that the nonprofit's doing, but they don't necessarily read or write the way, grants need to be read and
mhm.
written. There is a kind of a language to it, a different kind of language. And so I think identifying, yeah, once you learn how to write a grant or learn how to fundraise, you can raise it for anything that you're passionate about, whether there's education, arts, social justice, etc. And so I had an interesting thought, Ken, when you were saying maybe volunteering. I think if you haven't had a job, a full-time job as a grant writer, and you're starting from scratch, um, to get that experience, maybe you have an internship or some kind of you do a grant for free for a nonprofit that you love, or you're on the board of, or something that you kind of get that experience under your belt, and not be paid, because then you'll add that experience to the resume, and that will help you get a paying client. But that's kind of a way. And I think there are internships like that now for fundraising that there weren't necessarily when we were coming up, but I think that might also be good
Yeah.
if you can get an internship with a nonprofit, a
So you
development.
find out that you had these special skills that you developed over time in a small way, and then later you're able to parlay that into,
Right,
it's like, I can
right,
do this. I like to do this.
right.
There's a need for this.
Exactly. It's
Uh,
always
Br-
there. There's
yeah.
always a need, always, always. So
Bryn, so I'm particularly interested in the way it went for you because you started, even you have a business where this is what you do. You're a freelance grant writer. So
Yeah, happy to
how
share.
did you transition into that and decide like this was what I'm able to do this?
Well, able to do this is day by day. Um, Charles, you actually described my entry point perfectly. I was still an undergraduate at the time, and I had an unpaid internship at a very small, call it startup phase nonprofit organization whose mission I cared a ton about. So to speak to your point, Kim, about finding something that speaks to your soul that you would love to write for, that all clicked for me. And I think there was something very comforting in producing tangible proposals with deadlines and sort of the boundaries of here's what's expected as a way to enter the nonprofit sector as a whole. Um, and I spent time grant writing in that full-time capacity. It was probably I did some form of grant writing professionally full time for 12 years, and then saw other aspects of the fundraising landscape through that as well. But to your question, Oleg, I peeled off and started my own freelance nonprofit consulting business in 2022, so still quite new. I did that both because I wanted to sort of accelerate the pace of my own learning and be able to see much more than just what I was seeing while embedded at one particular organization. But to just be totally vulnerable and candid, I needed more space and flexibility to navigate a journey through infertility and starting my family. And so the freelance world was really enticing because I was going to be in the driver's seat of building my own day and my own work streams and timing and all of this. And it gave me time to also peel away and have really big family building priorities in the mix at the same time. So happy to speak more to the imbalanced balance of every day as well. But I think I feel quite lucky to have worked with so many different organizations in a full-time capacity to do a whole lot of learning and then sort of open the door to, what's next as sort of a fractional team member, a part-time team member, or just a contractor, depending on the organization I'm working with.
So you brought up something interesting that I want to cover a little bit later, and that's kind of the work-life balance as a freelancer and the process of working with clients. But before we do that, I'd like to dig a little deeper into the individual skills that are required to be successful as a grant writer. So, uh, Kim, can you get us started on breaking down the skills that are needed for being a grant writer, either freelance or working in an organization?
Sure. So this one might not be considered as a skill, but it kind of is, and that's being curious, because being curious is what helps you talk to people about the work they do and for it to stick and to be meaningful to you so that when you write about it, you can find a natural um, tone or uh, a tone that works, that you're not fabricating, that it's meaningful because you were curious about it. I think you have to have basic writing skills. You have to be able to use grammar and punctuation. And as we know, all the rules around that are changing and ebbing and flowing and being pulled and stretched in fascinating ways.
Mhm.
And the language stays together. And but it's opening up. But you still need the basics. I highly recommend The Elements of Style by E.B. White, who also wrote Charlotte's Web and I think Stuart Little. That book helped me tremendously to navigate grammar and punctuation. Um, and that might just seem nitpicky, but really what it helps you do, and this is a skill, is to write concisely. And because as a grant writer, you'll be writing to word count or character count, that is very important. So that's a skill. It's also a skill to be able to interview and talk to people because you're going to find that you're going to be asking questions about how do I find this? Where might I find this? Or you might have the opportunity to talk to people inside the organization or who have been impacted by its mission or, worlds around that, people in worlds around that. And you want to kind of sharpen your interviewing skills. And it's not natural. It is something that you can, I mean, it's not natural for everyone. So you might, like walking is, we walk, we have legs, we walk. Just because we speak doesn't mean we can interview folks. And it's hard to do. And so getting experience doing that, where just being in front of people. Um, and I think those are sort of the foundational skills that are necessary to not only write competitive grants, you have to have a little bit of that in you. You have to have a little bit of uh, sense of drama so you can build the story and make it interesting. But that's all writing. I mean, writing, storytelling, writing, and collaboration skills that allow you to go to the budget person and say, hey, do you have a budget for this specific project? This is what I need. This is when I need it. Thank you so much. That sort of thing. So project management skills,
Mhm.
collaboration, curiosity, writing, uh,
Drama.
drama, and attention to detail. And that'll take you a long way.
You covered, I think, the majority of the ones that I was thinking of. That's good. But the element, this drama surprised me. I like that because, but it makes sense. Charles or Bryn, do you have anything to add or anything to highlight? Charles? Or,
Uh, sure. Well, no, interviewing people,
mm,
and that is talking and knowing what questions to ask. It's also listening and making sure that you accurately get what they're saying or part of the story, especially if you're doing like a profile of a recipient of nonprofits programs, like someone. It's a more personal story. It's not a staff member of the nonprofit. Being able to interview someone and get their story accurately. And maybe the program person might do that and give it to you, but sometimes you may have to interview um, someone like that as well. Collaboration, absolutely. That was in my, I think not, and well, I think people get very, not protective, but people who are good writers can be very like, I wrote this draft, it's perfect, don't ever change it. And an executive director may also be that way. And Yeah, it's all about the give and take. It's all about the for
mm,
me. It's all about the give and take. It's like I'm trying to make it a stronger piece of writing. They're trying to give me the meat and potatoes, the good stuff of the program work, and just being able to collaborate and have a sense of humor. And don't talk to the finance lady on Tuesday because she's in a foul mood because of payroll. Or you get to learn like don't
like an
to
emotional
navigate
intelligence kind of.
to navigate,
Yeah.
be careful, know when you're supposed to ask something and how you're supposed to ask it. And there's psychology in that, and there's just people skills, basic people skills. But you really, as a point person that you're talking to different departments, you really are kind of a funnel and conduit, I guess. And you just have to know the field, I guess, the landscape of that, or the terrain and within a particular nonprofit,
It's interesting.
um, something like that.
You've because the interviewing has now, you've highlighted interviewing, and a lot of grant writing seems like you're by yourself and you're doing the work of the writing, but indeed it seems like there's a whole nother element of it where you're collaborating, you're interviewing, you're talking to different people, and you're taking feedback and you're responding to that feedback.
Right.
So
Right.
that's the interesting points to consider for the folks out there. Bryn, did you have any other skills to add?
I don't think I have new skills, just spins on skills that Kim and Charles already mentioned. The listening slash interviewing piece I find illuminating. I mean, one of my favorite things to do is before I even touch a grant proposal or a template that I've built for myself to draft within, I will sit down with a couple of members of the team, usually an executive director or CEO, to get sort of the big picture, high level vision. And then, if possible, I'll include team members who are much, much closer to the day-to-day work as well. And I'll just ask them to close their eyes and tell me what would be true by the end of this grant term if everything was successful. And I think literally closing your eyes and dreaming ahead can get people out of the, well, I have to say the mission statement perfectly. It's these words in this order. It just sort of like releases people from um, that very important consistency, but I think it can trap us at times. And I think it just allows people to expound on the purpose, the mission in a new way, and helps me hear um, like the tone and the style of the organization. So that's just a double click on that listening interview piece. And then, Kim, I couldn't agree more about what you said about project management and detail orientation. I think you could be a grant writer for an organization, and that's great. To the extent that you also become sort of air traffic control and can forecast what's coming up, when a deadline is about to be a problem, when a report might be due related to a grant proposal you worked on, that switches you from, quote, just a grant writer, and I'm putting that in air quotes, to truly an indispensable contributor, even if you're not full time or even officially part time with an organization. So that's fun to think about, and just an extra layer. It's beyond the writing piece, which hopefully you also love to do.
I like that idea of closing your eyes and
Mm.
or asking people to close their eyes and kind of envision. I almost want to do that for my own life. What I want for my own life. I feel like it does it is sort of freeing, right? When you
Yeah.
close your eyes. Kim, you have your hand raised, but you're muted. There you
I
are.
just wanted to piggyback on what Bryn was saying about it's not just writing. And when we think of it, as I did, I focused primarily on the skill of writing.
Mhm.
But there's a whole host of skills related to that. The reporting, the grants calendar management, and all various other responsibilities that can um, come into play as a grant writer. It's a misnomer. It's, I don't know what it is, grants professional or some
Grant's manager.
grants manager. And also it kind of describes the a potential career arc that you go from writing, one grant to being someone responsible for all the grants and the grants calendar, to maybe someone who does the research on grants and suggests funding sources. So it's a whole array in world, and I just wanted to add that.
So as a freelance grant writer, is this something that you typically are participating in? So the grant has been written and then the period of the grant begins and the work begins. Um, is that something a freelance grant writer is typically responsible for monitoring the calendar and the assessment and the reporting, um, keeping track of it, or is that something that the organization does and you're kind of once you've written the grant, you kind of take off?
Well, I think everyone here has had different
Mm,
experiences, some being yes and some, sticking to one
mm,
way. But if you're freelancing, you're often uh, within the tax laws. I'm not sure if you can still be a contractor from a tax perspective if you work a certain amount of hours for a organization. But you are, for me, the way that I've set it up is to say, ask the question, am I going to be the lead grant writer?
mm.
Going to be the editor? Am I going to, what's my role going to be? And I think defining those roles at the beginning of a project is really helpful. Okay, I'm taking the lead, which means you're managing the clock in a sense, the calendar, and it is a deadline driven undertaking. So
Mm.
that's an important role. Now, if you're just, if not just, but if you're the editor, that's different. Someone else is taking the lead. You have a communication loop going where you're providing valuable, useful edits, and there's just so many different ways, and that's a long way around answering your question, Oleg, that it kind of really depends on the situation, how that all plays out. And I think that's the cool thing about it, going back to Bryn's story, how it worked out for her life. And it's a beautiful story, but it was real. And so I think if you have the need to control your time, and you can do that, then having the flexibility to be the lead on one grant, to be the editor on another, you can really make it work for you. I think that answered the question. I may have went off track.
Well, it's all good information and advice. And I think part of this panel is providing kind of general advice. But for me, I also am curious about each of your individual journeys. And so I wanted to ask, and then we can move on from skills. Um, what were some skills that you didn't have at some point in your career progression that you were able to develop or expand more? And then how did you do it? Charles, did you want to start with this one?
Yes. I was thinking, what are the challenges that I faced around
Like
this?
what
And so,
was it like any
yeah, the skills.
skill that yeah, a skill that you
Well,
didn't have before, wasn't as developed before that you've developed and how?
well, it's sort of a form of time management, is estimating how long something will take. So if I'm working on, and that's part of the scheduling and being ahead of the game. And I'm a Virgo, I'm supposed to be ahead of the game and have it done 3 days early, but I don't usually. And just estimating how long will it take to, because if you are dependent upon X person providing certain information and another person providing other information, and to corral all that, given their time frames, it's just really hard. And sometimes the writing comes very easily, and sometimes
Mhm.
it comes more slowly. If it's a new foundation I've not written an application for, or it's a new organization I haven't written for before, um, those can take longer. And just estimating how much time it will take so that I can say you'll have a draft by Thursday and really
Mhm.
deliver on Thursday. Instead of supposed to be like Thursday comes, I'm like, well, actually, it's going to be Friday. No, that's
Mhm.
really bad as a freelancer. It's been, and that's been a challenge for me. And I've gotten better, and I think just practice will do better. But it's still a challenge sometimes, especially if it's a new client, a new foundation, all of these new things that I don't know about. I mean, I've primarily written for arts organizations, but I've done some around working with deaf children, services, or housing, or political engagement. So there's all of these kind of things that I'm learning about at the same time that I'm trying to write about it. So that again, can estimating that and being accurate about that. It's a challenge for me still.
Mhm. Yeah.
But I'm gotten better, gotten
Mhm.
better. But it's still, I think it's one of those things like I know how to manage things time wise, but
Yeah,
writing
to
can
like
be one of
for
those
to
one of those
forecast,
animals
it's a
that it's not
challenge.
it doesn't obey all the
Mhm. A lot
time.
of
My
there's a
writing
lot of
does not
moving parts in
obey.
different organizations,
I can't
right?
make it happen sometimes, as fast as I
Mhm.
want to. So
Yeah.
um, that's been a challenge. But being able to project management and
Mhm.
time management, all of that, and um, is so valuable. So valuable.
Mhm. Thank you. Bryn, how about you? What is a skill that you didn't so much have at the beginning of your career progression, then you've developed, and how did you develop it?
Always still developing. I'll name two things. And I think this first one comes with time, but it's it's becoming a very careful reader of what the application is asking, and reading between the lines. And what I mean by that is a very common question is, please share an overview of your organization, including mission, vision, history, and target population. And you could very quickly tick that off in a checklist. But if you're reading the full application and trying to understand the arc of the story from question one to question whatever number there is, there's a way to infuse even more into the way you respond to that first question to really guide the reader in the way that they're absorbing the story that you're beginning to tell. So at the very beginning of my grant writing experience, I would absolutely have just almost bullet pointed mission, vision, brief history, target population. And it's only, you know, 15 years later that I'm like, oh, wait, there's room for more here. And it's my job to guide a reader, a funder, a potential supporter in a particular way. So that's one thing. The other thing that I'll share, and this is less about the skill of developing the proposal itself, but really getting clear with me, like when is my best writing time during the day? When am I going to be able to put forth the effort that writing takes me? And when am I going to have the energy to do that and the uninterrupted time to do that? I think I used to cram grant writing in like 3 to 5 p.m. my time, and that is Bryn's worst time for writing. Morning is my time. So I think that's another gift of freelance work or side hustle work or, you know, self-employed work. You get to decide when and how and where it happens. So calendar management, Charles's skill, I have absolutely tried to embrace, and then to couple that with what is Bryn's energy going to be doing at a particular time of day,
Mhm.
and making those two things speak together.
For me, nighttime is the right time.
Oh, I wish, Oleg. I wish.
But you don't know that when you're starting. You don't know, like,
No.
I if you have an 8-hour job, you're like writing all day. But if it's, I don't know that I didn't know that mornings were best. I didn't know that I was a night person or whatever. It's like it takes time to learn that and accept it and
Mhm.
work with it.
Kim, how about your skill or skills that you didn't have initially and that you've developed over time?
Um, well, time management is definitely one of them because, and time management as it relates to when do you write best? Because writing on a job, you don't always have the luxury of choosing that. And when you go freelance, you can set up you can do that. You can write when it's convenient for you, or not just convenient, but when, as Bryn said, the energy, it takes a lot of focus and concentration to write. And so for me, I'm a morning person now. In my younger years, I was a night person. And I don't know why that happened, but it did. And recognizing it and going, okay, I have to be alone in my head and able to just write and
Mhm.
think. And now scroll and go, I wonder if blah, 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 and go on Google and find out. Um, so that is a skill I definitely didn't have. And I would say my writing skills have vastly improved because I have been a grant writer for much of my professional life. Um, Very much so. And my ability to ask questions. I still can be very direct sometimes and I get in my own way. But knowing how to ask questions, and if you're asking a series of questions, sort of to build in, uh, you don't want to lead with the hardest question to answer. You want to lead with an easy, as they would say in journalism, they're softballs, and you toss the softball and then get to the harder question. So the interviewing skill is also one that I learned
Mhm.
as a grant writer.
I want to toss. I've got tossed you a few softballs, and now a hardball question that I know that people are curious about. And actually, I think we had somebody in the Q&A ask this as well, and that is potential income. So, I guess the question is, how do you think about potential income? What is the potential income for a freelance grant writer? Do you get paid like per grant, and how much could you get paid per grant? Can you give us any insight on the finances involved with grant writing and doing it in a freelance way. Bryn, do you want to start with that one?
Love to, because I think this is something that we don't talk enough about. And in American society, talking money is icky, or maybe that's Britain society experience. Um, but let me share what I know so far, and you all come back and tell me what I've missed. So the way that I think about what you can earn as a freelance grant writer, I'll just name, I don't spend 100% of my time grant writing only. I have a small handful of organizations that will come periodically with writing needs. And so it'll be a very specific project. And typically I have scoped the project to take 20 to 25 hours. And then I think about an hourly rate that feels representative of the effort that I'm going to put forward. And I multiply that by 20 to 25 hours and give them that project rate. Um, but more typically, I'm working with organizations where grant writing is just a piece of a broader sort of strategic plan that we're creating and then moving forward together. So it's a little tricky to pull out just the grant writing piece. But my closest approximation is an organization that I did just grant writing for and not on that like periodic basis. It was a consistent role that I was playing for them. And I'll just say the number out loud. They were a multi-million dollar organization. So this was also them being fiscally responsible with their, hard earned raised funds. They were paying $4,000 a month for grant writing services. And it was kind of anything and everything that might come up in a given month. Letters of inquiry, which is sort of the entry point to being potentially invited to submit a full proposal, to the proposal piece, to the post grant reporting piece. It was all of those writing projects. And it was almost like an on call structure, which, depending on how you like to operate, could feel really energizing and exciting. For me, it felt a little hectic, honestly. So I learned a lot about how to kind of rein in a scope of work and to assign a dollar value that honors and represents the work that we're doing together, and then is also very mindful of an organization's finite resources and the fact that they can spend them in a lot of different ways. And my goal is never to put anyone into a tough financial situation. So I just said a whole lot, but
So that
what
four
did I
thousand
miss?
dollars was kind of like kind of a retainer. You were on retainer
Correct.
for that amount of money, and they whatever work they had.
That's right. Yep. And it shook out to be 2 to 3 writing projects. And I say
Mhm,
projects because it wasn't all just grant proposal. It
mhm,
was, again, reports and letters of inquiry and impact snapshots, etc. But 2 to 3 per week.
mhm,
To sort of multiply that out over the course of a month, it was 10 to 12 discrete deliverables.
mhm.
Yeah, in a 4 weekish period.
So you had to
Everything's pink.
consider, yeah, you had to consider kind of how much time you spent on that per week to see if it was and it ended up being worthwhile, both in the work style that it required, but also were you making enough money
Yeah,
to make it worthwhile for you to continue in that way?
exactly. And that's where it's saying, Oleg, because I think, you know, at least most organizations that I've crossed paths with now, a lot of team members understand capacity and value as a certain number of hours. So it often helps an organization to understand I expect this to take 15 hours, but as a freelancer, contractor, self employed human, it may not make sense for you to spend all 15 hours every single time or to set up an hourly rate. So it's what you were saying earlier, Kim, about thinking about how you need to cover your own living expenses, sort of that's step one, and then marrying that with the organization's needs and financial position as well.
And Charles, what insight do you have on the potential income as a freelance grant
Um,
writer?
yeah, I mean, I've struggled at times to price my work out, and Kim had a great resource that she shared with us the last time we were doing this panel about based on the size of the organization, if they're very large versus a very small organization, the duration of the project. I often worked with people who they'll find out my basic hourly rate and they'll be, well, we think we need 15 to 20 hours a week. And so there's kind of a parameter. Some weeks it's 15, some weeks it's 20 or 22, or it varies, but I've learned to be very clear and robust about docking my hours, keeping track of my hours, because often early on, I would just write and do that. Oh, how many hours did I spend doing that? That's part of my estimation issue I was having. Be very, trans, as transparent as possible about how many hours something will take. Uh, it helps if I've applied to that foundation before, because I'm very familiar with the application process or the reporting process. Depends on how experienced the nonprofit is. I've worked in very small nonprofits and I've worked for very large ones, so it varies. You definitely can make a living off of it. Um, I have not been as consistent. I've not. It's not been my main it has been my main source of income, but I've also had other things going on as well. So it's hard for me to sort of answer
I'm
that. And
curious
yes, you can make these.
what a range is like for in terms of an hourly rate, say, like what is a fair range for somebody who's in 2025 who's starting out as a grant writer, who's has an experienced grant writer for different organizations, what like starting at like is it like between 25 and $70 an hour, or is it a little bit
A
narrower?
little higher for me. It's been
Yeah.
sort of between 25 and 100, depending
Mhm.
on what it is. But you also people don't know how much to pay to pay
Mhm.
for writing sometimes. They don't know. They think it might be fast, and it may be faster than it's not as fast as it should be, or
Mhm.
they want to spend $500. That's it, and they want to
Okay.
get all these things done for $500, and they can't get all of the things they want for $500.
Mhm.
So um, there's about priorities, having that discussion about priorities, and um, I've I've probably been undercharging sometimes, but I'm learning not to do that so much. Thanks to Kim and others. That it's like there is because there's value to what we're doing, and and some people think like, well, do you get a cut of the grant if you get a grant? No, we don't get a cut of the grant. It's not marketing, it's not sponsorship. It's we provide a solid service at an X amount of rate, and that has value. And if you don't believe it has value, then do it yourself and you'll find out it has value. It's like, I mean, and I would never be that rude to a potential client, but it's like the more experience they have with grants, the better, I would
It's
say.
any freelance work. I mean, you have skills that an organization needs, and
Right.
there's a
If they
certain
don't value you
value.
in the same
Yeah.
way, it can be I don't know,
Mhm.
it can be hard. But I try not to have those clients
Yep.
anymore. Kim, save us. Save me.
No, I wanted to add what you were saying, Charles, and that is when you write you know when you're actually writing a grant and it gets polished, it gets through all the stages and it gets submitted, what the client has is all that writing and they just paid for it. And so all that writing can support their programmatic writing. It can support their fundraising efforts in different ways through individual donors or through various foundations. Some of it can become boilerplate, which I think is, with missions and histories can be fairly common. So there's that you're getting the value of the proposal and all the related things in that universe, and you're getting the descriptions that you didn't have before. And that's how, and I think for myself with clients where they go, oh, I love how you write about that. I love how you see that. Then you know you have legs there if you want continuing work. And if not, if it's a one-off project, then you have the satisfaction of knowing that your approach to their story was something they were comfortable with. And I just also want to add, I've always done it hourly, small, medium, and large organizations. And in the LA arts and culture world, that's determined by budget. And so, 100,000 and less, 100,000 up to 500,000, 500,000 plus, or a million. I have to look at that sheet, Charles, the breakdown. But I charge different hourly rates for things such as just research versus fully polished proposal lead writer. And I think the lead writer for a large organization is like 125 an hour, and the research for a small organization was like 25. Now I haven't updated that for a couple of years, so you have to look at the market as well. But I think hourly is safest because you are providing a extremely useful, valuable service.
And it
But
takes time.
I also wanted to say too, the other thing is Bryn is she markets her services as she's an entrepreneur and small business owner. And these are the services that she offers. So she's and tell me if I'm wrong, Bryn, but I think the retainer for that type of construct in the relationship makes a lot of sense. But if you're just hanging out your shingle like, hey, I'll write your grant for you, then the hourly might make more sense.
So one thing I would like to know, and I mean, there's two questions that I want to get into, and then kind of move over to our audience questions because there's quite a few and they're very insightful and they'll carry our conversation very well. The one question I want to, and you guys have teased parts of this out already, is what's the process of working with a client from beginning to end? Like it doesn't have to be any particular, but like a sample client. You just choose one and say, this is where the steps that we took working together, what happened and what was delivered and how did you communicate? Was it by email, in-person meetings, Zoom, etc.? Open us up to the possibilities. Maybe just choose one client and talk about that one. Bryn, would you like to start?
I love this question. And it connects to something you were sharing earlier, Kim, about choosing a mission or a purpose that resonates with you. I think, especially under the umbrella of freelance work, it's important to choose people you love working with too. Part of why you hang your shingle out is because you have some desire, I think, to bring more something to your own professional work life. And so why not have the opportunity to choose incredible people to collaborate with? Um, so let me think about a particular client. Most of the organizations I currently support and have supported have come through a connection from a previous life, whether it was a full-time job life or a friend or a family member. So that sort of word of mouth reference, if you will, works in both directions. They thought to connect you to an organization and that organization to you because they saw some early potential synergies. And I think that helps a lot as you're considering new work. Um, I usually have at least one or two conversations with ideally the person who will be my main point of contact at an organization to get to know each other. And before we're even talking about the nuts and bolts of what we want to accomplish together, it's just kind of assessing like, are we going to fit nicely together? Is this going to be a really fulfilling way to spend each of our time? Um, and then after sort of that relational connective piece feels like two thumbs up, then I love to start talking about how to accomplish, the big goals that an organization has. And I think I've gotten better. I'm not great yet. I've gotten better at matching a proposed scope of work that I pull together after a series of conversations with what an organization has communicated they needed, and then making sure that becomes reality. It's so easy to have a scope accidentally balloon because once you're working with the organization, you see so much, and ideally, your client is able to be very candid with you. And so you want to fill the needs that you see, and you want to fill them in a way that is efficient and effective and compassionate. And you bring a lot of skills to the table, and you may be able to do a lot of those things. But then that's a way to, you know, become a night owl when you're an early bird, or vice versa. So it's really important, I think, to always lean back on that initial human connection so that you're able to say, you know what, this feels a little bit outside the scope that we originally discussed. Can we revisit, or, pull this back a bit so that it's, more feasible for me and for you and for both of us, all of us. So that's it's
Mhm.
conversation and a lot of getting to know you, honestly, before you ever touch the work.
Mhm. So you scope out you meet with a person to see if you're compatible, and through that process, you kind of gradually move to scoping out the exact deliverables and the work process, and the communication process, and presumably the different checkpoints on the way. And then what happens at the end? So you turn in the deliverable, the grant, and then what happens?
Well, so typically the way that I've set it up with clients is they are ultimately the ones hitting submit.
Mhm.
So it's a nice checks and balances. I'm not embedded in the organization for good reason, and I think it's helpful for an organization to be able to toss up their metaphorical graduation cap at the end of a process. So typically I'll hear from an organization like, check, green light, go, we're in, now we're waiting to hear what we hear. And that's my signal to ask for really candid feedback. How did this go? Was this what you expected? How would you change this for next time? If there is a next time that we've already planned for,
Mhm.
let's implement that feedback immediately. And again, you kind of cycle back into that very relational, conversational mode, because I think that's where you get the most learning and most potential to improve. And I think it helps, again, under this freelance umbrella, it helps an organization feel like they've got a true team member. They may not have, an email address with their organizational domain attached to them, but I think it builds that sense of trust and camaraderie, which is so, so important and is part
Mhm.
of what, for me, makes freelancing feel um, almost as connected, if not more so connected, than when I was working full time at one single organization.
The human element is vital
Absolutely.
to the process.
Yeah.
Kim and Charles, I'm curious because what Bryn just kind of outlined, is that just the normal way things go, or are there distinct differences in some of the other clients that you've worked with, some of the clients that you worked with? Kim, if you want to start.
Well, okay. I think that the idea of normal has to be taken in the context of your experience, and how you got into it, and the way you entered grant writing and learned about it. Um, so that part of it, I think, is really dependent on your perspective and what you're hoping to accomplish yourself. As far as working with clients, I everything Bryn said, I agree with. So I won't um, hit those points too much, except to say, um, when you do have to get to the point where you are establishing what's the goal? What's the client's goal? And who's going to be on the team? And what's your role on that team? And from there, then you can start making decisions about, is this the right thing? Are these folks I can work with? I've had clients that lasted for years because you just hit the ground running, and it was
Just
like
keep
you've
going.
known each other for 100 years.
Mhm.
I've also had clients where, and this is a quick story about the client from hell, the one that you go like, no, never, 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 was an organization, um, a arts and culture organization, founded by the director. It was still the original executive director after about 18 years, which is a long run. Um, and I did not know anything about the art form I was writing about. I was asked to come in at the last minute, and I did because I was curious about
Mhm.
that art form. And I told the director, I will have questions that I'll need to be answered. I mean, I can Google and I can do all that stuff, but specific to your organization, I got previous proposals that were helpful, but there were some things that I really wanted, just what Oleg's been asking this panel. I want to know your experience. And she was not only unwilling to do that and share that information, she was actively hostile against the idea.
Mhm.
And so I had not experienced that.
Mhm.
So when it happened, I was reeling. I was just like, wait a minute, wow. But her perspective was, you're the professional. You tell me what to do. Don't ask me anything.
Mhm.
Go off and write it. And so that was a one-off project,
Yeah. So you
you
guys
know?
didn't connect on a major disconnect in work process there.
And that's where I started really being clear with people. I'm very collaborative, and that's why I need an editor or a main point of contact. I need someone to be able to get videos and photographs or
Mhm.
letters of support or testimonials that were written. Someone willing to share the organizational history, from a fundraising point of view, so that the proposal is, one big story, that all the different components of a grant proposal are telling the same story. And some people get that and they're like, that, let's do it. And some people are like, that's not how they work.
Mhm.
Uh, and so knowing that up front is makes your life, it's not only easier, but it's much more of a fluid process without a whole lot of anxiety.
And over time, you develop the ability to identify who your clients are.
Yes, and I've also needed money and
Mhm.
going, okay, I'll do it.
Let's do it.
And then you're like, no, this will not be happening again. And and that's how you learn. You have to go through those uncomfortable experiences. And you also find that you make mistakes that some people are very compassionate about, and
Mhm.
they don't lose respect, or they don't judge you too harshly. They say, okay, let's move on. And
Mhm.
then everybody learns. And but I think it really is, sometimes you have to get bit, to know, okay, not going there again.
Mhm.
Uh, and it is an individual journey within the
Yeah.
field. To that point, though, Oleg, I'll just add quickly, there are publications. There's Philanthropy Today. You can go to Indeed.com and look up jobs in philanthropy and grant writing specifically. If you have a particular arena that you're interested in writing about, like the medical arena, um, uh, you know, youth sports, community organizations, there's all different ways you can Google terms. and then look at what's out there. Journalismjobs.com. That's a source for grant writing gigs. And yeah, so all that.
Charles, I noticed that you were laughing or you were smiling when Kim was talking to us a moment ago.
Um, well, my most of my experiences have been more like brand sort of. There's a like a the client I was thinking of. It's a film festival I write grants for currently, and they put a posting on LA County Arts and Culture or something, and so I responded thinking, oh my God, they're going to get dozens of people interested, and that she got a handful of people. But I just said like, here's my resume, this is my background, blah, blah, blah. And I don't know that much about film. I'm more of a consumer or a fan, not a creator of film.
Mm,
Um, but at that sort of I sent the email with my resume. We set up a Zoom chat just like this and sort of went back and forth. What are they really looking for? Um, and and she lives in Europe actually, but film festival's in LA, and so there was some communication um, hurdles to sort of figure out time wise. Like her morning is my midnight, and
mm,
like if she needs something in the morning, I had to be very clear, like my morning, her morning. When are we sending something? When are we calling? But it's that sort of courtship a little bit. Like this is who I am, this is who you are, this is what we need, reasonable expectations. Then another client I had where I did that sort of thing, and then certain things came out. Like the executive director had been there a very long time and did things a certain way and was not as collaborative as I had hoped. And anyway, lots of sort of things came out. I was like, okay, this is difficult. But it was a time contract rather than a project contract. And then the first client that's worked out really well, she wanted to hire me for one grant. That's it, just one
mm,
grant. But she had all these other things that she wanted, and so convinced her to do like let's do a 3 month time period, estimated number of hours per week. This is be the rate, and just comfortable. Now we extended the contract 3 times, so
mm,
she likes to do things in reasonable, um, smaller amounts, and then because she too is scared of getting her feet burned or whatever. It's
mm.
like you just don't know. Someone could be totally different than what they present themselves to be. So, clearly I deliver on time, and she's been satisfied with the work, and we keep going. But we didn't know that after a 45-minute conversation. You just don't necessarily know that for sure
Right.
on either side, and so that is proceed cautiously, and then as more trust is developed between the working relationship, and then you know the flow that's going to there's not going to be any issues like that came up before. So I don't know. It's a
Yes.
lot like dating, really. No, 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 no.
There's some similarities. You don't need to
There
walk
are
that
some
back.
similarities,
I think there are some similarities in
right.
working with clients. So let's move into some audience questions. So the first question is, and this I think this is a more general question, although this person had a particular slant. So where do you begin to find grants? This person said, particularly for sustainability-minded programs. But what are some resources that you use? Let's even expand this a bit. What are some resources you use to find grants, if that's part of what you're doing for a client, but also some resources for learning to write grants, for templates, etc. What are your favorite resources for grant writing and finding grants? Brent, would you like to start?
Of course. Um, I'm going to say something unpopular, probably, maybe, because I think there's a lot of stock put into these databases that you can purchase access to. And, they'll cull the whole internet for you and spit out hundreds upon hundreds of grant opportunities, which is excellent. It can definitely give you a direction, and you look at the first 100 and you already feel overwhelmed by the list, but it's definitely a way to go. I do something that's free, and well, free for now, Google. Um, but I look for organizations that are similar to the organization that I'm writing for. Or I just ask the client that I'm connected to, like, who do you consider your peers in this space or your competitors, depending on mindset?
Mm.
And I go stalk their financial records, which are public information. I look at their supporter lists and I see where they've received funding from and when. And that becomes my own starting list, just to better understand the ecosystem that I'm operating in and I'm a small, tiny part of. Um, it's free. It's interesting to hear the other organizations that the organization you're supporting may name. And it's great historical information about funders who have ideally recently supported a similar mission and are therefore potentially inclined to take a look at the work that you're supporting.
Mhm.
So that's some of the it's called prospecting research in fancy fundraising terms, but that's how I like to start my own prospecting research and just sort of steeping myself in the ecosystem. I can stop there, Oleg, or talk
Yeah,
quickly about other resources if helpful.
our timing is a little bit limited at this
Yeah,
point,
let me
but
stop.
I think that yeah, chaining different organizations to create a map of resources is that's good. That's a great tip. Kim?
So I think that in looking for grants, if you're looking for grants opportunities, and you're writing for an organization that's uh, well, okay, I'm just going to start from my perspective. I've always looked, uh, doing what Bryn suggested is brilliant. Look at when you go to the theater, if you go to the theater and you see the sponsors on the wall and you're writing a grant for theaters, note all those sponsors or note those folks because it's all going to inform your potential sources of grants. But I start with government because we're all living in a world where government agencies provide funding and starting locally. Are you in a town? Are you in a city? Are you in a county? Well, we all are in the US in a county and in a state and then national. And so those sources of funding um, in Los Angeles, there's the County Board of Supervisors. Each of those supervisors gets discretionary funding, which means it doesn't require a vote to spend that money. So you can write to your local county supervisor and say, this is our project. What do we need to do to apply? That kind of thing. Private foundations are typically started by a person or a family that has an interest in one specific thing or a slate of specific areas that they're interested in funding. And like Bryn said, you Google and I mean, there's like foundation directory. I don't know that you have to pay to get on that, but Google is your friend. Just Google places that seem as like possibilities. And then corporate foundations that offer grants or sponsorships, some type of support. Really just looking at what is the mission of the organization and sort of pairing in your head together what might be a like-minded company that would be interested in supporting. So that's sort of a very broad way to approach, but I think it's worked for me.
And Charles?
Yeah, I'm more of the Google, look at the annual reports, whose logos are on their websites, and track people down that way. And some people may say, I want the Annenberg Foundation because I see their name on everything, but that's like divided by 4 kids, and each one has a particular thing, and you wouldn't necessarily know that. But people in the foundation world or grant writing would know that. You need to have a real personal connection to someone. Some foundations say no unsolicited requests. So that means you have to have, that doesn't mean completely no, but that means you have to have a contact
Mhm.
somehow and somehow squeeze your way in there, which is a, you know, not as profitable as if they say we support this and we have an open call and you
Mm,
apply twice a year, those sort of things. So it is a bit of a research puzzle, I guess, at finding things. But start with the nonprofit and say who do they think they could get money from, or who their peers are getting money from, and just track it, track it, track it. I don't know. And the databases are expensive. There's some modest ones, but again, they churn out hundreds of prospects, and then you're like realize, well, that's only in Indiana, and I'm in California, so that's not going to work. And you can sort of filter through a lot of those, but why spend that effort doing that instead of doing the Google research that Brandon speaks about?
mm. Sounds good. Now, I have a question here that a few people have asked in the chat, and I don't know if I should ask this one because I don't want to open up a can of worms. Uh, and we don't have that much
We have four
time.
minutes.
We have 4 minutes, and I want to get to another question as well. So I'm just going to do it. AI. What's the impact of AI in grant writing? Does it help? Does it harm? Are there ethical issues? How do you see it impacting the future of grant writing?
Can I go?
Yeah,
Um,
do it.
They said AI learns from existing examples of grant writing. So they will create solid-ish grant applications, but they need the human touch. You need the human story. They can't interview someone. Well, they probably could, but they're not going to. They're just going to churn it out, and there are no shortcuts. There really are very few shortcuts in this process. And yeah, and they're not coming from our jobs yet. They might, but they got to get smarter than we, and they're not yet. They're just not. So that's
I'm
my
going to add to that too. Because I feel pretty passionate about it. AI is definitely in our world. It is being used much more in a narrative way than ever before. Um, and the way that I feel about it is it's a tool, and it's like any other tool out there, except um, it does not have what Charles just described. There's that quality of being human that is uh, makes the writing real. And so, as a reader, imagine being the reader of copy that's been generated by AI. Can we tell? Not always. But if you read a whole grant proposal with maybe 10 questions and maybe, 5,000, 6,000 words, a little more, you get the sense like something's not quite there. And that might change in, a week's time or in a year's time, but it's a tool, and use it wisely because we are human and we want to be on the planet living lives. And the more we use our human faculties, which include storytelling and writing and reading and um, sharing all of that,
Mm.
we want to do that.
Bryn, did you have anything to add on AI?
I really don't because you're talking to the kid who doesn't use social media, let alone artificial intelligence. But I agree, Kim. It's a tool. It can be used for really great things and not so great things. I think what catches me is that if a bot generates a proposal, we submit a proposal and it's approved and, great. I hope a human brain and a human touch has interacted with what was essentially promised in that proposal because come reporting time, if AI has generated this beautiful, well written picture of what will happen, and humans have not sort of checked it to make sure that an organization has the capacity to carry that out, it could cause significant issues and delay funding or negate funding in the future for that particular organization. So it's a tool, one of many in a toolbox, and it's important for the human to be the one wielding the tool.
Thank you. Oh, we were able to cover that. Whew. One more question. I really want to cover this one because a few other people have asked this one also, and we kind of covered it a little bit in parts, and that is how do you market yourself to clients? Like how do you get clients? So we already talked about the networking aspect. So Bryn, you had mentioned that a lot of the clients were come from a previous career and clients you've had before. And I think that the other Kim and Charles also mentioned getting clients that way. Are there other ways above that or beyond that that you market yourself to clients? Charles, do you want to start?
LinkedIn, I think is
LinkedIn.
really good. I prefer it over other job site places, and there's a lot of networking and collaboration and education thing opportunities there. That, I don't know. I've gotten some nibbles from there. It's often
Mhm,
who you know, or seeing something and applying for it, or just
mhm.
like the film festival that I'm running
So, do
for.
you make posts on LinkedIn, or you just have an account or have a profile, and then people kind of message you?
Well, people, yeah,
Mhm,
I have a profile and
mhm,
I put my resume, and people are looking for things, so they
mhm,
can, but or they'll see that I know someone that they know, or there'll
mhm,
be some kind of there's a way of tracking connections like friends on Facebook, and oh, we have mutual friends, and maybe you're, and you can write recommendations for each other or endorsements saying I worked for
mhm.
him or don't hire him or whatever. But there's I don't know. It just seems very user friendly and comprehensive, and I like it, and than other sites. So, although I'll put a plug out for idealist.org, which is
Idealist.org.
a
Yes.
nonprofit job site. They have internships. Someone asked about internships. There's internships, there's volunteer opportunities. They do a lot all around nonprofit that LinkedIn does, but not the same way. And it's free.
Kim?
Yeah, all of those places. Idealist. Do you have to pay for Idealist?
No, it's free.
Okay. Yeah,
I
those
think
are,
to post a job you do. To post a job you do, but just browsing and everything, you don't.
yeah. I mean, for me, it's mainly been word of mouth and talking and working with organizations on other projects and then coming in as a grant writer. I've used, I think, Oleg or Charles, you mentioned LA CultureNet as a source of potential clients because it is odd to me, but I don't think there are lots of grant writers. And I've found myself in a small pool of recommending, hey, or asking, are you available? I can't take this on. So LA CultureNet if you're in LA. And then what was the other one? Oh, if finding a candid.org. And that's where I wanted to say it, Oleg, is so if you LA CultureNet is a listserv. So it used to be a Yahoo group, but I think if you Google LA CultureNet, you'll find that it's an IO group, maybe is
Yeah,
the way.
I found a URL. I'll post the web address in the follow-up email.
And
It's like a
if that's what
listserv.
you're interested in too, it's fantastic. It's been a great resource for years and years and years and years.
Mm.
Um, and then I think it is a matter of when you're out and you're talking to folks and you just say, oh, I write grants. What is it you're looking for? I heard, overhear people, be you know, a listener, an over listener. Yeah, what do you call it? Uh,
An
a
eavesdropper,
busybody.
a
Yeah.
gadfly.
No, I've done that and it's worked. And you don't have to be pushy. You just have to, oh, how about that? Me too. And those have been the most ways. There are resources like foundation directories, um, but I think it just I think what's coming out of this panel is that we're all really in the do it DIY category of find things that make sense to you and dig, be a
Mm.
detective, ask questions, be curious, and you'll find places. There's definitely a need.
That's good to know for all the folks that are here. Bryn, how about you? You mentioned networking as a main aspect. Is there anything above and beyond that that you do? I know you have a website.
I do, yes. I'm going to start to sound like a broken record, but the human connection and conversation, I think, has brought me my most fulfilling work and projects. And if you're just dipping a toe in or just getting started, one thing you can do tonight or tomorrow morning, if you're an early bird, is truly just send a quick email to friends and family. Like, these are the types of things I'm interested in exploring and potentially working on. Can you keep your ears out or your eyes peeled for me? Send me things that come your way, and then send a periodic update to that sort of friends and family group, because it's amazing how just keeping on somebody's radar will help them connect the dots when they're, overhearing that person in a coffee shop or at their dentist's office in the waiting room. I have to go to the dentist, so that's top of mind right now. But yeah, just keeping your champions informed about what you're looking for, and as you get more and more specific about what you're looking for, make sure they know those more specific findings that you've made, because they'll be better sourcers for you in that way.
Like the better sources and sorcerers.
Yes. Hopefully there's some
Magic
magic in there.
job. That would be great. Well, I thank you all for providing this magically engaging information about freelance grant writing in all its various aspects. Thank you, Bryn, Kim, and Charles. For the audience out there, I am going to post a post-event survey. It only takes 2 minutes to fill out, but I very much appreciate you filling it out. So do click that link and give me your feedback about the program. Once again, thanks to our panelists. Thanks a bunch to our panelists. This was great. And thanks to all the folks out there who spent time with us and asked your great questions and were engaged in our conversation. We'll see you next time.